Thank you. I want to thank Alex. I want to thank Philip and everyone else from the organizing team for inviting me. It's really great to be here. And yeah, really nice to see all of you here. I'm actually happy that I'm not getting Baldur's Gate 3 numbers here because it's like, okay, this is comfortable. I love this number of people is great. So yeah, Alex, thank you for the intro, but I'm going to reiterate some of the points myself. My name is Arvy. I'm a lead UI UX designer working with Raw Power Games. I've been in the games industry since 2013, so in fact, it's going to be 11 years, not 10 years of me in the industry, but 10 is a prettier number. A timeline for this. So I started in 2013 in the company called Sparisoft, which was an outsourcing company. And I was really lucky to have some of the first clients that I worked with were BioWare, some work done for Riot Games as well. But this was outsourcing. I really wanted to get into full, in-house game development. And so as a gamer myself, I really wanted to look for these opportunities. In 2015, I joined a mobile games company called Game Insight. Had a 5-year tenure over there. But since I'm a PC and console gamer at heart, I really wanted to get into that part of the industry. And so 2020, I had a chance to join Frontier Developments, shipped 2 projects with them, and 2023, I'm joining the Raw Power Games team. And yeah, in the meantime, also I was freelancing with indies, some other projects and stuff like that. So in total, yeah, here are some of the projects that I've been working on. Most recent ones being the 2 Warhammer titles, Realms of Ruin and Rogue Trader, which coincidentally both shipped last year. So yeah, it's been a while. I've been doing this for quite a bit. And actually, while preparing for this presentation, I was trying to think what I should talk about, right? Because yeah, I've been doing this for 10 years, but I'm just a guy, right? I'm not anyone special or anything special in particular. But also, I've been reflecting on the types of things that I've been doing throughout the years. And it just so happened to be that I've done it all, right? I've done web projects, mobile projects, from indies to AAA, from UI UX to marketing to you name it, right? And so trying to concentrate, accumulate all of this different experience, I was actually thinking that the best way to build this conversation, this presentation here, would be not to talk about specific practical things, like what are the best layouts for mobile games, or what are the trendiest fonts, or the best color schemes. What's the best pixel count for the roundness of the button, stuff like that. There are plenty of great resources online that you can search for. What I would like to talk about instead is I would like to try to reflect on the years in the industry, and also try to talk about things and concepts and ideas that influenced me a lot. And so while I was preparing for this, I was at first, well, is there stuff to talk about? Is there interesting concept? Are there interesting concept ideas that I can talk about? But sitting down, I would map just 22 various different topics that I could devote entire presentations to by their own, right? I'm having these blurred because I don't want to spoil too much, and I cannot talk about all of them. We don't have too much time for that. So after thinking about this a bit and preparing, these are some of the things that I would like to cover in today's presentation, and coincidentally, this is the plan for today. So I'd like to talk about, well, universal immovable truth. Sounds complicated. It's going to be easy in a moment. The importance of tools and how they reflected on me. The importance of process, developing a personal brand, and also some conclusions. We're going to talk about this in the end. And yeah, I want to start with universal immovable truths. And so a lot of people seem to seek these universal truths, simple, clear answers about things like how do you do good UX? And it's there's no simple, definitive answer because it always changes. Because in reality, universal immovable truths don't exist, right? Because what made sense to us 10 years ago might be different compared to 5 years ago, compared to now. Because whatever best practice we believe in, because whatever knowledge we have at the moment, it's going to change. Because all of our sort of mindsets and philosophies and ideas and all the ways that we're thinking about the work that we're doing, the projects that we're making, it is a process. You know, it's ever changing because the context changes, our users change, the trends change, the economic situation changes. A lot of these things, the tools change, right? I'm going to talk about the tools in a minute. All these things influence the way that we're thinking about the work. They influence the way that we're doing our work. And in order to reflect this change, what I like to, how I like to approach all these different concepts and practices and all of this is the thing that I reductively call a dialectical method. What does it mean? So dialectical method means that I treat all of these things as a process. Like, how do I treat tools? Well, the way I did it 10 years ago was different from the way I'm doing it now. So it's a process, it evolved, and it's justified about everything, right? And also this process is driven by internal contradictions. So the way I'm thinking about tools, the way I was thinking about tools 10 years ago, has internal contradictions that with developing further reveal themselves and need to be battled. So yeah, this is more complex than it actually is. So let me talk about the first topic here. So yeah, 10 years ago, let's say the first idea, first concept, tools matter, right? Tools influence everything. They shape us. They shape the way that we work. I mean, Rob and Jan will agree to that because they're very, very important in the workflows. They're very important for the way that we make our games. And for me, in particular, I feel like they're important 10 times over because I gotta admit to you guys, I actually don't have a formal graphic design education. I'm not a trained designer, classically speaking. I've actually majored in international relations. However, in 2012, 2013, it was much easier to get a job in game development than in diplomacy. So it was like 10 years forward, here I am standing in front of you. I was always interested in creativity, though. I really wanted to do something interesting with art, with whether it's going to be traditional art or film or games or what have you, right? This was the part that always brought passion in me. And so one of the reasons that I'm standing here talking about this is because 10 years ago, well, this wasn't 10 years ago, of course, because many, many years ago, this guy actually got access to these various different tools through gaming magazines. I don't know, the older millennials here remember that there were things called magazines, right? And they had CDs with them. They had demo discs. And so a lot of these demo discs also had, this was before internet, by the way, all of these had games, of course, but also some kind of software, right? And I got exposed very early on in my school years to pieces of software that kind of predated Photoshop or were like very cheap Photoshop analogs, like free Photoshop analogs. And with them, I had essentially an option, a chance to do some, cool stuff in a very safe environment. So if you remember forums, this was before Discord and stuff, so forums, I was making some signatures and avatars for people, some graphics and stuff. I dabbled in modding for GTA games and Half-Life. And also, there was a humoristic school class newspaper, and people saw that I was doing some, graphic design things, and they're like, "Hey, could you please do some stuff for us as well?" This was super amateurish. I didn't know what I was doing. Obviously, I was a fucking kid. But I was in an environment where I was exposed to tools. That's number one. And number two, these tools allowed me to express myself in various different ways. Over time, I had enough practice to start getting some gigs, like some web design gigs, some freelancing stuff, some freelance graphics. This was like mid 2000s, late 2000s, early 2010s. And I was able to leverage all of my experience, right? These experiments that I had while I was a kid. I was able to leverage it and try to express it on a new sort of level. I was able to do some paid stuff work. This is abysmal, by the way. Like what I was doing then, again, I didn't know what I was doing specifically. However, I tried my way, with trial and error, to get into situations where I could do some things, more professionally, so to say. And yeah, with time, I got exposed to more professional tools, more industry standard tools. And when I landed my first job at Sparasoft back in 2013, I already had some experience working with these. And it was quite easy for me to, at some point, get into the flow to be like, okay, I understand what I'm making, right? I have some idea where I'm going to. And again, the actual exposure to tools, the actual ability to experiment with them, their approachability and accessibility made me of what I am. So for me, tools were extremely important. One thing though, and this is the contradiction, the internal contradiction part that we're going into, right? Tools were super important to me. They allowed me to be who I am. However, in the actual production environment, first at the outsourcing company, but then later on when I moved on to the mobile games company, where we had to work a lot with Flash, right? If you guys remember what scale form is, I see some people nodding, right? This is, a bit of a pain, right? So I was exposed to these tools, but then in the actual production environment, I also was exposed to how these tools were used suboptimally, or rather, they were used to the best of their possibility, but this was all that we had. We had nothing more than that. And so the idea is that, it's kind of skewed here, but hopefully you can read it. These tools started to introduce friction that actually not enabled me to do the stuff that I wanted to do. Like, this is great for me. I love doing graphic design, and I love doing UI design, I love doing all these stuff. But then I have to, if you remember how to work with Swift files, that was, a whole thing. You had to first build stuff in Photoshop, then you have to export all the graphics, then I had to upload it and rebuild it from scratch in Flash, then I had to export it with specific parameters in Swift, and so on and so forth. This was the whole thing. In order to change like a couple of pixels somewhere, I had to go for like a half an hour of work time, essentially. This was far from perfect. And of course, it introduced friction. It introduced dissatisfaction with my work, right? Because, it's not pleasant. It creates mental overhead. It creates a lot of mental blocks, mental friction. Many years later, I think it was 2020 or 2021, I stumbled upon the book by Cliff Kwang and Robert Fabricant called User Friendly. I highly recommend this book. I really, really enjoy it. But this book, many years later, gave me the sort of necessary vocabulary to conceptualize and think about these things of friction. Because back then, when I was experiencing this in 2013, 2014, 15, 16, right, I was like, yeah, I don't like it. I don't know how to talk about these things in more, broad terms. Great stuff. In this book over here, they actually have several examples of the development of usability throughout the years. And they're talking about various different tools. And again, earlier, there were examples of planes during World War II, how they were kind of unoptimized and prone to errors and stuff. One of the things was their averaging design, but the other thing was that all the buttons and stuff, they were grouped without any sense. They did not have a lot of them. A lot of the buttons in the cockpits did not have labels and stuff like that. So it introduced friction on top of a very difficult task of being a war pilot, right? And so the same sort of situation happened here, right? The Flash and all these different early tools, they introduced friction instead of just enabling me to do my job. So saying all of that, maybe tools don't really matter after all? Like 5 years ago, so 10 years ago, I'm like, tools definitely matter 100%. But then like over time, I'm also looking at the landscape where the tools are getting better and better and better. And more oftenly, they get more uniformed, so to speak. So we have a lot of selections of tools, right? We had arguably many more tools than we had like 15 years ago, for example. However, like broadly speaking, if you were to design an interface like in prototype stuff, whether it would be XD or Figma or Sketch, broadly speaking, you could do this in Photoshop. Broadly speaking, you could do this in UMG as well, because a lot of them are sharing some, common things. I don't want to talk about them as sensible defaults, but there are a lot of common things that are like, if I would like to, I could do all my work in Photoshop exclusively. It's going to be not super pleasant, but it's going to be fine, right? With the development of tools, they start to become a bit more uniform because they share a lot of pieces of their UX language and their design language. There are a lot of affordances that are shared between the tools. I can do a lot of things that are kind of similar in various different environments. They're not the same. These tools are not the same. And also I want to double stress it that this is about UI UX, right? I'm not saying that Blender is the same as Photoshop, right? But the thing is, like broadly speaking, there is a way to do your job relatively painlessly with whatever the tool you're picking. And this is just the industry standards. Of course, we have many, many more alternatives. Not all of them are into the industry standard, but they're free alternatives. So you don't have to start with paid subscription to Photoshop. You can start in an alternative, but because of the shared design language, you can pick up a lot of things that then once you go into the actual professional environment, it's relatively easy for you to, get up to speed, so to speak. And then again, like 5 years ago, I was also mostly thinking about the importance of fundamentals more than anything else. So yes, you have our tools, and with the development of tools, they become a lot easier to use, broadly speaking. So it's more important for you as a designer, as a UI designer, UX designer, to be more concentrated in thinking about the fundamentals, the laws of UX, the types of experience that you would like to craft, and possibly predict the reactions of the users to it. And again, so these are the screenshots from the one of my personal projects that I did last year. Full disclosure, I'm not affiliated with the Witcher remake or CD Projekt Red or any of the teams. So this was just a personal exercise or project. So here, again, this was all done using two tools, pencil, paper, and then Photoshop in the end, right? I'm not saying that I drew it all with the pencil and paper, just so you know. But the thing is, so I skipped a lot of things that I would normally use when I'm like in my professional sort of environment, right? If it was like a real project, I would do a wireframe. I would do like a simple thing. I would go through this whole process before actually landing on something like this. But because it was a personal project, and because I had prior experience where I was knowledgeable enough, and the tools afforded enough flexibility for me to just right away start with something closer to this and iterate in this, and it was quite effective. But I don't want to say that tools don't matter. Actually, they do, but let's think of them as the extension of us, right? Let's think about them dialectically, right? Because with the advancement of tools in general, they tend to become a bit more uniformed, a bit more easy for us to hop between different tools and environments. So it's important for us to determine what are the exact experiences that we want to craft, what the goals that we want to achieve, and then decide upon them. If we want to script some of our own tools, we need to have these goals in mind. We need to have the fundamentals in mind, and we need to think about tools as application in terms of specific context, goals, and applications. So I feel like tools are super important in conjunction with the other thing, which is process. So this isn't like this is still a UI UX talk, right? We're not talking about production and all of this. However, throughout the years, I got to the conclusion that the process is an incredibly important part of this whole thing. And I'm not just talking about your personal process, like the way that you do things specifically. I'm also talking about, in general, broadly, about the team's process, right? Because making games is usually a team effort. Most of the time, it's a team effort. And it's important to talk about the ways that we're trying to get to the same goal, ways that we're trying to get to the same conclusion. Let me explain a little bit more. So one of the I would say it like this. Two of the most important goals for building a process is to bring clarity and battle entropy. This was like on the previous slide. So battling uncertainty and entropy. Battling uncertainty means bringing clarity. Throughout the development of the game, throughout the UX process of the game, there are all these different questions that start to pop up, right? You're asking, what is our target audience? You are asking, what are the expectations? What is our data structure? Where do we start? Is this hypothesis correct? Do you know who ate all the donuts? And all these different things. Like these are important questions throughout the game, but the thing is, throughout the development of the game. But the thing is that answers to them are infinite, and like, yeah, how do we build the layout? Well, it can be anything. The layout can be anything. The color scheme can be anything, especially early on when you're conceptualizing these things. Like, well, how do we pick and choose? How do we select what is the answer that is correct to us? How do we select the correct tool? How do we proceed? How do we know how to move forward? And for this, building a process is actually very crucial, right? Especially so in the UX phase, I feel like we can map the design process on this. I really like this PDCA cycle approach, where at first we plan, we hypothesize what we need for our designs, right? What we think would make sense. We talk to our teammates. We figure out, like, from conversations with game design and stuff, like, what do we actually need? Then we do the first iteration usually. We try to figure out what works for us. We try to create a shared understanding. Then we check, we test it. We need to test it as much as possible because, you know, user experience consists of two parts, and one half of it is users, and we need to get their feedback in order to proceed further, and then we need to act on the feedback. And it's really, really important to have this structure in place, however obvious it seems. Like, I'm showing this to you, and you might think, yeah, duh, of course we need to act like this. But you'd be amazed how many teams actually, you know, forego this. And yeah, so many teams forego this. However, there's like a flip side to it. Because if our processes are so rigid and everything is super duper clear, then it becomes a little bit like, well, it's a monotonous task, right? It's kind of predictable. I remember early on we were, this was a project for BioWare way back when, so almost 10 years ago. We had a very, like, in 2013, I was first introduced to what Agile is at all, because before that, I was a freelancer, right? I didn't have understanding of processes in the same sort of way. And so we had a really, really nice pipeline. It was really great. We were working remotely with the Edmonton team from Canada, and it was all kind of well-oiled. We had a project, one of the biggest ones was Dragon Age Keep. This was like a web project. And we have certain tiles that we need to design and draw for like each milestone and stuff. I'm not going to describe the whole thing, but the point was that at some moment, we were like, we figured the stuff out. We had our routine. We had like, okay, we go through here, we get some feedback, we do this, and and then another tile, and another tile goes to the same. And there was very little in terms of variation, like creative variation of each tile. They were great pieces of work, but at the same time, you know, kind of typical. And it was a great project, no fault of the people who made it, but it started to get a little bit, you know, monotonous, especially. So, yeah, afterwards, when I joined the mobile games company, I was joining the project that was very, very fresh. There were like literally 3 people, including myself. I was the only person responsible for like all things 2D, right, on this project. Even though I had web design and UI design experience before that. But this was like very sort of free form, free spirited. Yeah, let's create this small project within the larger team. And I remember this was 2015, August 2015. Game director of this project, who was also CEO of the company, like 2 months and we're shipping it, right? We're gonna take this old game from the NES era. We're gonna create like a spiritual successor to it. We have the template. We know this stuff. It's gonna be retro graphics. It's gonna be super smooth sailing, small team, small project. 2 months and we ship it. 5 years, 3 platform switches, 1 team replacement later, the game didn't come out. And yeah, this was a lot. This was kind of a lot. So this game initially started as a mobile game. At some point, we transformed it into a game from Facebook Messenger. Do you remember Facebook Messenger had games in it at some point? Then it switched to Android TV, smart TV sort of things that you had to, like, there was like literally a 1-button remote that you had to operate. And then it ended up as like an arcade title for consoles like PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. Yeah, and amidst all of that, there was like a complete full team replacement. So the team grew in one side, and then I was the only person left over from the previous team with like a knowledge base of what the heck we were doing. So this was a lot. This created, how you can imagine, this created awful processes, because actually, even though we didn't have like a super structured approach to it, there were a lot of like last moment, like someone coming in and being like, hey, we need to do this, we need to do that. Oh, I've played this cool game. What if we change the art style? That's fun. And so there were a lot of times where exchange of information was super inefficient, because there were times where we didn't maintain like a proper documentation for this. We didn't maintain like a proper task board and stuff. And at some point we had to come up with our own processes. I had to develop like process for my UI design team. At some point, like, no, we're tracking this, we're doing this. UI programmers had to do their own thing. But because there was very little in terms of centralized access to information, there were situations, I was in situations where like, okay, and I think that we're moving in that direction, and I'm doing the right thing, but then I was scolded for it because like, no, this isn't what we're doing. And I was like, how I was supposed to know, right? I didn't know that. So even without the actual processes from the beginning, the bad processes start to fill the void, because there is going to be a process and it's going to be painful. So I feel like the sort of synergetic way, synergetic way of thinking about these. So I feel like we definitely need processes, and the processes are crucial for all the disciplines, but I'm talking about personal experience in UI UX design. However, they have to be fueled by data, they have to be fueled by communication, but also leave some room for creativity and experimentation in order to not turn into monotonous slog. So that's why, like, in the current teams, there are people who are like, I wouldn't want to sit on a single type of task throughout the whole, 4 or 5 years of development. I would like to change stuff, right? And so in order to facilitate that, we need to have proper documentation. We need to have proper ways, proper processes to carry this knowledge from one person to another in order for it to be as efficient as possible, but also supporting creative expression of everyone in the team. And so, yeah, having this experience previously, I kind of sort of came to this realization that trying to be super invested and super involved in whatever you're doing, especially if it's changing every month or every week, or if it's super stressful, is not really healthy. I had to go to therapy after that, 5 years, and this was something. So as you can see, this is like 7 years ago, right? I had to first deal with this. I had to experience this in order to sort of conceptualize this sort of mindset where you don't marry to your work. And I'm using the word work here instead of job, although not marrying to your job is also important, but work specifically in terms of specific stuff that you're making on each iteration. I realize that I'm mostly looking over there. I don't want to leave you guys without any attention as well. So one of the things inside the process is that we're all participating in teamwork. This is like a collaborative process where each and every one is creating like essentially a step in a chain to realize the game. This is actually from the study from 2004 about like the actual importance of modeling, science, education, blah, blah. But like for me, I feel like this was very good basis for describing how the actual process of making a game looks. So for example, we have these various different sections like UI, UX. They're doing like their iterations with their chain, but also programming, but also game design. And there's art, there's audio, there's all these different other teams. And we're kind of doing our own thing, but it's also a very linked thing because we're all doing like something that moves us towards the next level of complexity. Then we're iterating and creating something that moves us to the next level of complexity, and so on and so forth. But we're sort of creating our own thing where like none of these individual sort of parts should be your magnum opus. You know what I mean? Like none of this should be like your final best sort of work that you put 300% of effort into, but then it needs to be changed because there are game design things that move us towards the final vision. There are programming things that program limitations or opportunities and stuff that we need to account for. So it's never just you single like ego-driven. This is like the best work that I did, and then I have to change it next week, right? That's where this mindset comes from, right? Because it's a collaborative experiences. And there are a lot of people involved. You have to go step by step. You cannot do like the final stuff. You cannot do this on your first step, right? You have to start with something simple. And this is like an example from my work on Jurassic World Evolution 2, where this is like obvious. Like it's very obviously translates into the actual personal process. Like you start with the wireframe. You start with, you even start not even before the wireframe, you start with just discussions, right? First we talk to people. First you read documentation. First you do the research. But then at some point you get to the stage of, okay, now you're doing wireframes, you're doing something simple. You're presenting these wireframes to the team. You're presenting these wireframes to the users. You're going over limitations and potential opportunities and stuff like that. And at some point, this will look like this, right? The final version comes very later, and you have to do a lot of very quick iterations first, and not not pour your entire soul and well-being and whatever into a specific iteration. There's a flip side to this approach, though, is that alienation hits you hard at some point, right? There comes detachment from the results of your labor because as I started many years ago because I just liked to do what I'm doing, right? I enjoyed using these tools way back when, and I just like to do this. I like to do this for myself. I have personal projects that just revolve around visual stuff that I just like to share my creativity. But during the 8 hours of my everyday existence, I cannot actually express myself to that fullest extent because I'm not the actual owner of the final vision. I mean, that's fair because it's a collaborative effort. That's fine. But at the same time, for me personally and for many people, this starts to become like a graveyard for personal expression because you're just you depersonalize, you detach from this, and you're like, yeah, I'm just doing my work and stuff. And for some people it comes easier. For some people, for me specifically, it came way harder because it was like I want to love to do this stuff I want to pour all my soul in it, but you don't have to, and it's unhealthy to do so so often. But again, this also coupled with suboptimal processes from the previous section, This is a burnout galore, right? Because nothing really matters, right? Because you're dependent on the whims of the users, right? Whatever you do has to be tested. You're proven wrong, and you're like, okay, I need to sacrifice my vision to do something else. And it's better for the product. It's better for the project, but like I would personally like to do this differently. Yeah, not your project, not your profit. So this is also like one of the parts of the realization that I had throughout these years is that, well, regardless of whether the project becomes successful or not successful, in a lot of teams, it's like, yeah, it doesn't really matter to me. Again, that 5-year stint was a lot. And so one of the things that helped me get out of this is working on, just in general, work on my personal projects and personal portfolios. It takes some time, it takes some dedication, it takes a lot of effort as well, but this was the place for me to express myself. And also, like since the game that never came out, right, I had to put something in my portfolio, so I had to start with something. And yeah, I kind of came to the realization of the importance of the personal brand. But I put the personal brand in quotations because I don't like this phrase. One, because it reminds me of cattle branding. So it's like, it's kind of weird. I'm not a famous person, so I don't consider myself as a brand or something. However, what I do like to see is I like to see it as a way to build connections, right? In order to build connections, I feel like it's important to also bring something to the table, figuratively and literally speaking, and to show something like, hey, I can do these cool things. And I can see that you can do these cool things. Let's chat. This is cool. We do kind of same things, and it's great to develop this kind of shared understanding and talk about the craft and find the community in these things. And again, I think Alex can support me on that as well. And so yeah, over the years, what helped me to sort of dig myself out of this alienation hole was personal work. And a lot of this also helped me a lot in terms of my professional career, funnily enough, because like Frontier was the place where I got hired because of this personal project, like reimagining of an old Star Wars game, where I didn't even do the test for the team. I was like, hey, this is cool. Let's just had a couple of interviews and let's start working. So for this, it was super important for me to try to maintain consistency in terms of like, okay, I have all my week booked with the actual full-time job. I need to dedicate some time to personal projects on top of that. And so in order to not burn myself out completely, I took like one of the methodologies for me was to look at Screenshot Saturday hashtag at Twitter. On Twitter, every Saturday, usually indie developers or anyone is sharing their sort of personal work and stuff, and they're putting hashtag Screenshot Saturday. And for me, it was a great external motivator to be like, okay, every Saturday, I need to show something on my Twitter, for example. I don't care about like how many followers I have or whatever. This is just, I'm putting stuff out there. I'm getting some response, and it's great. And like over time, like, so this was started essentially in like 2019. Yeah, so like trying to muster this consistency and effort in order to just do something that interests me. It helped me a lot. And so, yeah, I'm seeing that we're closer to the end here. To sort of wrap it up, I talked a little about the importance of process here, and the process is something that I essentially implemented in my personal work as well, right? And having this process be take a form of Screenshot Saturday posts, that was great for me. But also in terms of like, I can talk about this forever, but like negative space in creativity was something that I was searching for. Like, I want to pick a theme for my next project. I was like looking at trends, looking at social media and stuff, and I'm trying to look for what is kind of missing in order to, for it to facilitate the theme of my next project. Yeah, so to reiterate once more, tools are super important, but they're not everything. because they need to also be used in conjunction with processes, effective processes fueled by communication. And in order for processes to work, you have to be invested, but not 300%, but a reasonable amount percent, so that you can also creatively express yourself in it. At least these are the conclusions, or some of the conclusions, that I got to throughout my 10 years in game development. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arvy. Ooh, there we go. So, Q&A time. If you have a question, please raise a hand. I'm going to give you a mic. You can ask it. You can ask your question to Arvy, and he'll try to answer it the best of his opinion. Any questions? We have time. Okay. Mr. Storm. There you go.
Arvy, thank you so much for the talk. I was wondering in this case, like, there's a couple of things that you start off in one way, right, 10 years ago, then it's changed a little bit midway, and now they're like very different again. I'm wondering if you're thinking about the future, like 15 years from now, 20 years from now, what other change do you think you would see happen there? Are there things that you think like, oh, in the future those things will change again, just as that they have 10 years ago?
That's a very interesting question. I feel like we talked about this briefly when I mentioned that I feel like in terms of tools specifically, right? If you talk about tools, there's like a generalized movement towards more uniformity, right? This is a difficult one. So, like I mentioned, like a lot of tools, it seems like 20 years ago, right, were very sort of, this is a specific bespoke tool for this specific thing. And now, like, I don't know, when in 2014, 2015 or 16, artboards were added to Photoshop, we celebrated at work, right? And artboards were some of the things that were already present in some other design-oriented tools. Though I feel like there's like a movement towards like the generalized uniformity of tools within tools, right? Where Photoshop can do all these different things. It adds AI, it adds all these, you know, other features. It can work with video for a long time. It could, you know, and Unreal is a powerhouse of an engine that allows for all these different things in motion graphics and blah, 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 and various different extensions. So I'm not saying that in the next 5 years we're going to have a single tool for everything. No, but I feel like there's like a general uniformity of tools that is going to be expanded. Yeah, in one way or another, that's for sure. Yeah, other than that, I don't know. I don't want to, like, because especially with all this AI stuff right now, it throws a wrench into any prognosis that I could make right now. But yeah, that's my answer for you.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? We got a question over there. I need to be far from that.
Thank you for sharing your insight. You shared a lot about the development, the changes in the development of the UI and UX role from your point of view. Could you share a bit about the attitude of the industry towards this role in particular, since we all know that UI and UX has been recently being integrated in the games development process, and it's still in kind of its infancy compared to the IT industry, for example?
Yeah, also great question. So if we're talking about the change of attitude towards UX, right? I feel like it matured greatly over the last 10 years. So when I was starting, I was starting as a sort of graphic designer and web designer-ish kind of person. And then it was like, oh yeah, UI is something that you can also kind of do. And I myself, at certain point, just became specialized in UI, right? Because it started to become an actual field of work. So I feel like, yeah, over the years, a lot more things have been written and told about UX in general. We have a lot more knowledge. Again, laws of UX stuff, like we didn't have, I'm not saying that this didn't exist, like the Gestalt and all these different things, but they were combining together into like a unified, oh, this is a UX discipline, and this is our knowledge base, and this is how we can go into it, and these are different sort of, they're UI artists, they're different from the UI designers, they're different from UX designers, because there's also a thing that's called user research, blah, 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 all these different things. So I feel like, yeah, it became much more specified, much more like concrete. This is a discipline. This is what we can do. And thankfully, to Alex and all these different wonderful people who are doing the We Can Fix It in UI community, it's great that we start to having this community in general. So yeah, I feel like it matured greatly, and it's a great thing to see because we have much more knowledge about this. And again, like in 90s, for example, like everyone, it was a total Wild West. Nobody knew anything about user experience. What is user experience? I'm just drawing pretty pictures, pretty buttons. Sometimes they were amazingly pretty buttons, but not necessarily user-friendly. And so over the years, we started to get this vocabulary, necessary vocabulary to conceptualize all these different things.
Thank you.
Can I make a quick shout out here to We Can Fix It in UI?
Absolutely,
so
go for
the
it.
people that don't know what We Can Fix It in UI is a Discord community that was co-founded by a bunch of people working in games UI and UX a few years ago. And now we've grown it to this, it's close-knit community, but of about 2,000 people now. And it's mostly people who actually work in games UI and UX, but also people who want to get into the games industry and work in UI, UX. And we've basically been sharing a lot of resources, and we're trying to build a lot of knowledge in these particular disciplines so that we can share it all out. We also have an extensive wiki that's wecanfixitinui.com, where basically we've tried to assemble every single online free resource, from GDC talks through books, through lectures, to blog posts and stuff like that, that can help you in your career as a games user interface designer or user experience designer or user researcher. So find us on Twitter, like we can get an invite. And there's a question over there. Go ahead now.
One. Okay. I have two questions. First one, what is user experience? And second, if you would talk about, let's say, 3 most important qualities of a UI UX designer, what would that be?
Okay, so what is user experience? It's the experience of users. No. So user experience is the totality of experiences that the user gets from your application, game, product, let's call it generally, from your product, right? So if we're saying that UI is part that informs the user experience, like interface informs the user experience, but also loading times also affect user experience, right? Because if the loading times for a game are too long, then the user experience suffers in general. So a lot of people pair UI UX. I feel like it's a bit of like an outdated pairing, because UX is not just UI. User experience is the like totality of your game, of your product. Second question, 3 most important qualities of user experience. Again, we're coming
Designer.
back to of user.
3 most important qualities of user experience designer.
Of a person. Cool. So again, we're coming back to universal, immovable truths, right? What I'm saying right now might change in 5 years or whatever else. I personally think that UX designers have to have a lot of empathy, because they're creating stuff for other fellow human beings. They have to be very mindful about not being concentrated inside only their head, their perspective, their experience. They have to extend this, to other people. So having empathy is super important for a UX designer, in my view. I would say patience as well, right? Having patience to meet these other people's perspectives and consider them and be mindful that, okay, this isn't how I would do this. This isn't how I would react to this, but I can see that my users reacting to this certain way. I'm okay with, being patient about it and being able to detach my ego from it and be like, okay, yeah, I will do it this way because this is like the most important thing. And it requires some patience here as well. And I feel like also being very production-minded weirdly enough. So I was talking about processes, and it was a huge chunk of this because processes also inform the first two qualities in a way. Because in order to be empathic, in order to be reactive, properly reactive to other people's experiences, I need to have a process in place that keeps me, in check, keeps everyone else in the team in check. So I need to be very mindful about the actual, production side of it as well. So it's not just about, I understand your experience and your experience is different from mine, but we also need to implement it somehow. And I need to think about all the knock-on effects from how we are implementing these things as well. Hopefully this answers the question.
All right. Well, thank you, Arvy, very much for this talk.
Thank you.
And applause for Arvy, everyone.